Hey creeps and grave hunters, you guys know I couldn't stay away for long, and given that I've been doing my 13 Days of Creepmas over on my Instagram, I figured what better way for me to contribute than by giving you guys this strange and curious history of these little gingerbread. Now before we get into all the spicy history it has to offer, go ahead and slaughter that like button and massacre that subscribe button so I can keep making these jazzy little beasts for you. You guys know I'm all about the spook tale, and I've been posting some pretty fire spook tales for Creepmas over on my Instagram. So if you want my little, technically, okay, I'm gonna be real with you guys. This is like a gingerbread martini, but my cute little guy here didn't fit in a martini glass, so he's in more of a goblet. But if you want the recipe for this yummy spook tale, go to my Instagram, then come back and get your history facts on Gingerbread Man, because it's weird. Also, this is a super special episode because Bella Melino is making her first appearance on the channel, which makes no sense to me. She's my cat, if you guys don't know, and she is my life. So gingerbread, it seems pretty standard, right? Like Christmas cookie, we make little men out of them, cute little houses. It's not that complicated. It's just a regular cookie like any other, right? Nope. I am so ashamed to admit that I was unaware of the really long and complicated history that gingerbread has until very recently. And what makes me super embarrassed about that is I freaking love gingerbread. Like, I love it. I love the smell of it. I love the look of it. I have sweaters with it on. In fact, this lipstick that I wear in pretty much every video and every photo shoot is literally called Gingerbread Man, okay? I am obsessed with gingerbreads. The fact that I didn't know its history, and I love history, is criminal. I should be put in prison. So in order to spare you guys the embarrassment and shame, the deep-rooted Christmas shame I have that I don't know the history of gingerbread, I'm gonna share it with you guys so you don't have to suffer the same suffering that I've suffered. Have I said suffer enough? I think so. The upshot? Gingerbread is way more than a cookie. It's a global phenomenon, okay? Gingerbread dates back to the ancient Greeks and Egyptians who were making what they called honey cake as far back as 2400 BC, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. And their version was like a very kind of thin, rigid version that they would use for religious ceremonies. Then you have the ancient Romans who benefited from the Mediterranean trade route from the east. So they had access to ginger and the spices to make like their own spiced up version of honey cake, which they would turn into like heart-shaped little cookies that they would serve at weddings. However, that was not for everybody because these were still expensive ingredients, which meant if you had these little cookies at your wedding, you probably had bank.
Sing a song.
It was a definite sign of prestige and wealth. And unfortunately, when the Roman Empire crumbled, so did that tradition along with the recipe. But food historians believe that their recipe was an altered, more spiced up version of the ancient Rhodes recipe of honey cake, which was literally just honey, sesame seed flour, and ginger. So pretty cut and dry. Then of course you have the Chinese who grow ginger and have been using it for like freaking millennia for medicinal purposes, but gingerbread's not really their jam. Like, you're not really seeing a classic Chinese gingerbread around the holidays, you know what I mean? So who can we thank for bringing it to Europe proper and making it into the Christmas tradition that we know now? Not surprisingly, we can thank murder. Hear me out. An Armenian monk who fled from Persian persecution, murder, in like 900 something AD, fled to France where he settled and brought with him a spicy little Byzantine recipe for honey cakes. And when it was tasted by another, there was literally like a manuscript describing the taste of this honey cake, and it described it as a heavenly delight. Sadly, those delights didn't last long because they didn't have readily available access to ginger, but fear not, because when the victors of the first crusade into Jerusalem more murder, came back, they brought with them tons of spices, including ginger. Oh my God, thank God for those crusades, right? So at this point, you just had the monastic order baking up these little treats, and they would make like a paper thin version, kind of probably disgusting, and they would use that for the Eucharist. Here's the interesting thing though. They discovered that they made like a wafer version, which I guess they could also have used for the Eucharist. It had healing properties, probably because ginger's really freaking good for you. So they would use these wafers to help cure the sick, although sometimes people died from eating too many of the wafers. So we have a real full circle life moment here, right? Like, kill people to get the ginger, and the ginger saves. It's kind of pleasant if you think about it, right? But it gets better. They realize that it keeps longer if they add pepper, which sounds crazy, but as you'll see, pepper is actually a really popular ingredient in gingerbread, which means that it can last for a really long time, which they end up making and preserving and use to feed and nourish people in times of famine and plague. So, gingerbread really is multi-purposeful. These little monks are also the ones that first started changing up the recipes and turning these into kind of cookies that on religious days, they would press the dough into these really intricate molds of saints and other religious figures and hand them out as gifts. So this, my friends, is kind of the beginning of gingerbread men. Okay, not really, but sorta. It's really more of the beginning of the most common and oldest tradition of taking gingerbread and pressing it into really intricate molds. Okay, enough with monks. Somewhere around the 12th century, ginger is not necessarily more affordable, but it's not just the monastic order anymore. It's more readily available. So like royalty has it in their kitchens. Wealthy people might even have access to it, kind of, sort of, a little bit. But basically the point is, bakers are now also using ginger, which means they're coming with their own gingerbread recipes all over Europe. And this, my friends, is where things get nuts. One of the most interesting things I think about gingerbread is that all throughout Europe, you have like different gingerbread capitals. And what I mean by that is it seems like every country has their own gingerbread hub where gingerbread bakers have been making gingerbread since like the 1300s. One of the most famous gingy capitals is Torun, Poland. And this is where things start to get spicy, literally. So they've been making gingerbread since like freaking forever. And one of the legends on how they started making gingerbread goes all the way back to 1233, where supposedly a local prince invited these knights from the Teutonic Order in Israel to come out. And they did come out, and with them they brought all of the ingredients to make pepper bread, which is gingerbread, but the main ingredient is pepper. What is for sure a fact is probably the most famous confectionery in Torun, Kopernik, has been making gingerbread since 1763, and one of their main ingredients is pepper. Now, their recipe has gone unchanged since 1763, and although Kopernik won't share their secret recipe, they have said that some of the ingredients they for sure use is pepper, ginger, flour, which a lot of the times back in the day, we're talking, obviously hundreds of years ago, people would use stale breadcrumbs in lieu of flour, but they use flour, and cloves. And the cloves, they said, helps age and preserve the dough, which is a whole other thing, guys. These people are aging their gingerbread dough. So gingerbread bakers, this is not a joke to these people, okay? It is literally like making wine. It takes skill, it takes time. There's an aging process, and people got really protective over their recipes. For example, you have in Nuremberg, Germany, around the same time, the 1700s, they were also making a gingerbread with some pepper. And when things really started heating up in Torun, the people in Nuremberg were like, yo, Kopernik, it's cool, bro. You can make your pepper bread, okay? But just don't steal my recipe, and we're all good. Capiche? I think what I'm trying to get at is, to these people, especially in the Middle Ages and the Elizabethan era, gingerbread was not just a dough. It was a skill. It was a way of life. If you were a gingerbread baker, that came with reverence. I mean, this was so well regarded that gingerbread guilds were put into place so people could actually distinguish between like an amateur gingerbread baker and like a real refined gingerbread baker. They are like the sommeliers of gingerbread. In fact, there's protections put in places. Like in Nuremberg, it was illegal to bake and sell gingerbread outside of Easter and Christmas if you were not an actual like sanctioned gingerbread baker. And this served a couple different purposes. Number one, as a gingerbread baker, you felt protected, and this also helped cut down on competition, which meant you might not be as stressed as people stealing your recipes you knew most of the year. You were one of very few that could actually make a living selling your gingerbread. It was actually a really, really great time to be a gingerbread baker. I honestly think that these different guilds and protections are kind of what helped different regions and countries come up with their own versions of gingerbread, because the taste, texture, and ingredients varies throughout the continent greatly. Like for example, in Turin, their gingerbread is thicker and chewier, unlike, you know, other places where it might be crisper and more dense or more wafer-like. Theirs is almost cakey, and they are definitely one of the ones that became famous for their intricate mold work. And they would take the dough and, you know, they'd press it in and it comes out with these beautiful shapes. In fact, if you are a child in Turin now, all the school kids always go to the gingerbread museum and learn how to make the traditional gingerbread and press it into these moldings. It's like a really cool thing. Gingerbread molds are also a thing that I didn't know existed, and now I'm currently obsessed with. My papa was a wood carver, so whenever I see really beautiful carved pieces of wood, my eyes kind of light up because I know he would love it. And these are just, oh my God, they're so intricate. And there's a whole collecting world out there that seeks out ancient wood molds for gingerbread, and there are a select few people that still make them to this day, but it is by and large for sure in art form. And if you've never looked up gingerbread molds, please do it because it's freaking impressive. Then you have places like Nuremberg, Germany with the Leberkuchen. Leberkuchen. Sorry, it's such a fun word to say. But they traditionally, you know, would make little heart-shaped gingerbread. And of course, we all know Germany is famous for the gingerbread house. And although, I'm gonna be honest, they've been making gingerbread houses since the 17th century, but it wasn't until the Brothers Grimm released Hansel and Gretel in 1812 that gingerbread houses became all the rage and everybody wanted them. I love a gingerbread house. Cute little child murder palace. All of these yummies were sold at gingerbread fairs and markets throughout the medieval era. And I can't even imagine what the smells of those would be. I'm assuming incredible. I'm assuming it's like the enchanting, beautiful Christmas markets that happen all throughout Europe that I've never been to and was planning on going to this year, but can't. We're fine. These markets were usually held around the holidays. So honestly, the path to gingerbread becoming a Christmas treat and tradition, and Easter, to be honest, didn't really take that long. That kind of kicked up pretty quickly with the monastic order, and then people only being able to freely, without persecution, being allowed to bake gingerbread during the holidays, kind of just made gingerbread a quintessential Christmas thing. But gingerbread men? Now that has a very strange, convoluted, possibly true history. We know that Queen Elizabeth loved gingerbread, okay? It was like a sign of her power that she had so much ginger in her royal kitchen. But there is a legend that says that she used to have gingerbread made up to resemble her mini suitors. This in turn led to like a folklore, essentially, of single women getting gingerbread men, eating them in the hopes to find a marriage, because what's a better way to start wedlock than with a little bit of cannibalism? In different cultures, a healer or like medicine person would make an enchanted gingerbread for a woman who was in love with the guy and wanted him to be in love with her. And it said that if you go to this person, you get this enchanted gingerbread, and then you can get this guy to eat that gingerbread, they would fall in love with you. I bet we all want the recipe for that, don't we? To be fair, There is another possible thing that Elizabeth did with the gingerbread men. Instead of making, gingerbread men of her mini suitors, it said that she would have gingerbread men, molded and painted to look like her visiting nobles, royalties, and guests, which honestly is probably more true. But between the two legends, or possible histories, I prefer the suitors one. This is not the only example of gingerbread being used as a love token. In Hungary, they have been making heart-shaped gingerbread that is beautifully painted in this incredibly glossy, bright red with a mirror put in the center of the heart, and men would give that to their woman to propose marriage or intent, or just like a, I love ya. One of the strangest things that gingerbread has been used for, in my opinion, is this thing called the ABC bread. Now, from the 15th century to colonial America, paper was hard to come by, especially as a parent sending your child to school. Paper was a luxury, okay? Not everybody had it. So instead, what they would do is they would send their child to the little schoolhouse with a sheet of gingerbread that they would write on. And as a version of a good job sticker, they would get to eat it afterwards. And this also, this is my favorite part of the whole thing, this also fed into the belief that if you ate things with writing on it, you would magically enhance your intelligence, because why not? Gingerbread has also been used as a form of currency, like in Nuremberg, Germany, where you could pay your taxes with gingerbread. Can we bring that back in here right now? I'll be baking all day. In 11th century England, women would bake a very special version of gingerbread with a lot of almonds in it and shape them into little flowers and give them to knights before the tournament for good luck, which I think is pretty spicy. And then in Sweden, their little legend or folklore, superstition, whatever you want to call it, is you take a gingerbread cookie, you put it in your palm, you make a wish, and then you tap it with your hand while it's in the palm. And if that cookie breaks into 3 nice pieces, your wish will come true. And as my last little bit of strange gingy history and my personal favorite, I love this one so much. It is said in ancient Rome, men would eat penis-shaped gingerbread in order to heighten their libido for orgies. God. Oh, that's fire. So whether or not you enjoy making little gingy murder houses, little men to snag a husband, using a cookie to make a wish, or perhaps just gearing up for a night of sexual debauchery, gingerbread is the gift that keeps on giving. And with the taste as satisfying as its history, I personally cannot get enough. That's it, creeps. Be sure to follow me on Instagram to keep up with all things 13 Days of Creepmas. And until next time, chin chin.